All right, so we've covered the basics of creating a 3D object here inside Photoshop, and we're going to be doing a lot more of that as we progress through the course. So you're going to get to see all these different things in action several times over, and you'll really get used to where they are and how to create them. Now in this video, we're going to talk about importing 3D. Now this is a question I often get, especially when a new version comes out with regard to 3D in Photoshop, is can you bring a 3D object from another application, something that was created perhaps in 3D Max or Maya or something like that? And the answer is yes, you can. In fact, the 3D features in Photoshop were originally designed for that very thing, for 3D artists to be able to bring their 3D objects into Photoshop and be able to modify them with Photoshop tools and be able to bring them back out or ultimately finish them in Photoshop, whatever they wanted to do. And it really kind of just took off with Photoshop having starting to generate its own features to be able to create and modify 3D, which really kind of was more of a slant to designers. And that's why 3D has become what it is. But you do still have that ability of bringing in objects from another application. And like creating a 3D object, there's a couple of different ways of going about it. You can go into the 3D menu and choose the very first item here, which is New 3D Layer from File. When you select that, it's going to give you the Open menu and allow you to locate a 3D file you might be wanting to use. Now you can click on the Enable menu here and you can show all readable documents, and this will show you the different formats that you can in fact open, or formats of 3D objects that you can open inside of Photoshop here. Now I haven't tried every single one of these, but most of them work pretty well. The one I have the most success with is, of course, the 3D Studio, or 3D Max files. They're tagged 3DS. And always seems to import correctly, but you can certainly experiment if you have a particular application. Experiment, just try different file formats that Photoshop can read and just determine which ones import your objects the best, maintaining the properties the best way. All right. So the other avenue, of course, is here in the 3D panel, where you can go and choose inside of the source menu here, go down here and choose File. And then in this case, when you just click Create, it does the same thing, opens up that Open panel, and you can go and locate your 3D file. In this case, I just have a habit of going to the menu. I have really different habits for different ways. I tend to use the panel a lot. Or actually, I use really both the panel and the menu when I'm creating 3D objects. But most often I use the 3D panel or menu when I'm actually importing a 3D object. So I'm just going to go ahead and choose that and locate my files here. And we'll do import 3D. Let's do this one here. So here's a 3DS file. And I'm just going to go ahead and click Open. And you can, of course, also drag, if you're on your desktop, you can drag this to your Photoshop icon and it will open it up in Photoshop the same way as a 3D, new 3D layer. So let's go and open up my window here. There it is. Okay. So this is my 3D object that was created in 3D Max, and here you can see if I just rotate it around, it's just this ornament element that I had downloaded from the web. And if I zoom in here, I can use all the relevant 3D tools to maneuver around and manipulate this object. And of course, in my 3D panel here, I can see here is my object and its various properties. I can go in here and choose. Now, what I'm doing here now is something I'm going to cover in more detail later, but just to show you, I've imported a 3D object from another application. I'm going to go in here into the texture files here in the 3D panel, and over here in the properties panel, I'm actually going to go and do new texture. Or rather, no, I'm going to actually load a texture. So let's go replace texture here. And on my desktop here, I have a kind of rusty texture here. I'm just going to go ahead and open that, and you can see it applies it to my object. Now, what I can do now, again, this is something I'm going to cover in more detail later, but just to kind of give you a preview, I can modify the scaling of that texture on this object. So I can just kind of scale it down a little bit. And you can see I'm getting this really kind of cool, rusty look on this object. In just a couple of steps, I've taken it from a 3D application, brought it into Photoshop, and was able to wrap a texture around it. And I can, of course, take it even further by doing things like lighting and applying even more textures, and even applying a bump map to this to get it that much more realism. So I can add a little bit more realism to an image or a design I might be working on. So there's numerous possibilities. not just with creating 3D objects, but with importing objects as well, whether they're fully realized models or just simple elements like this, where I can actually modify them and customize them to whatever finished artwork I want to do in Photoshop. But with those two avenues of bringing 3D or creating 3D in Photoshop, once you have those foundations, you open up a world of possibilities. And that's what we're going to talk about throughout the rest of this course is, now that we know and understand how to create or import 3D objects, what can you do with them from there? And that's what we're going to talk about as we progress. Now, in the next video, what I want to talk about real quick, especially for those of you that might be brand new to 3D, is basically understanding the 3D space here inside Photoshop. Of course, 3D is so new to Photoshop, and a lot of people might be so used to Photoshop being a 2D application, which up until now is all it has been. But now we're leaping into that third dimension, and it requires a bit of different thinking, and that's what we're going to talk about in the next lesson.